Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Chit Chat where I am joined by Professor Lorraine Hammond. Welcome, Lorraine.
Hello, Carla. It's lovely to be with you.
So I just want to take a moment, Lorraine, to acknowledge your new appointment. I understand that you have been recently appointed and have now taken up your position as Professor of Early Years Literacy at the University of Notre Dame in Perth, Western Australia. So huge congratulations. I can remember seeing the social post when you popped that up there. And it's a real credit to all of your years and years of hard work. So, yeah, huge congratulations from your friends and colleagues over the ditch here in New Zealand.
Thank you so much.
So today, Lorraine, we're going to be talking, of course, about one of your real areas of expertise, all about instruction. And I wanted us just to begin digging into why is it necessary and important that we do implement explicit instruction in our everyday literacy instruction?
Well, simply put, it's the most efficient way of getting from A to B. If you are teaching children something that is new and difficult, and of course, we both know with early literacy, this is something very challenging for the human brain to have to learn how to do. There are many pitfalls along the way. And if we think about working memory and the challenge of learning something new, explicit instruction is the most effective and efficient way, and there's a lot of research evidence behind it, of enabling that human brain to do it in the most effective way possible. It's going to be less time teaching it right the first time. And it's interesting, Carla, it seems counterintuitive to tell students the answer first because we spent a long time having children discover things, but it is more efficient to do it that way. So for me, it's efficient and it's effective. We know that there's a likelihood that any child could have a reading difficulty. We're never 100% sure. So it's better to start off by teaching explicitly. And then if some children do get it sooner than others, that's wonderful. But you wouldn't want to take the risk of not doing that and then potentially have a child who's a little older, not able to read, and we have to start all over again. So for me, it's about efficiency, and it's also about the most effective way. And of course, we're teachers. When I stand in front of a class, I have to think, what is the best way to teach these students? And of course, they're novices, and we're experts when it comes to reading. So teacher-led instruction, because learning to read is unnatural, is so important.
I think it's important for us to just sit for a moment thinking about the time in classrooms too, right? Because if we actually did the maths and we worked out what is the time that we have available to us as classroom teachers to get content and to deliver such a comprehensive curriculum. What is your perspective about the relationship between the importance of explicit instruction and the time we have available to teach those students we sit across from?
Well, I think if you look at any good literacy block, you're looking at, a significant amount of time. And then within that literacy block, you really want to be particular about where children's focus of attention is and what they're actually doing in the time that you have. So when I watch someone who's good at teaching explicitly, you get the sense that they're teaching with that sense of urgency. They are teaching more in less time. And so if we think about the human brain and what we're trying to do with literacy, it's absolutely critical that we maximize the opportunities to respond. And there's a lot of research on this at the moment. And I do find myself sometimes counting how many times are the children responding per minute. And about 8 to 14 times is considered optimal. So what this means is the children are constantly getting opportunities to practice all those little sub skills that we know have to glue together to make reading just happen the way that you and I do it. So time on task is about so many things. It's about working out what's important to teach, breaking it down into manageable chunks and providing multiple opportunities for practice, which of course is what explicit instruction is all about.
Can you tell us a little bit about when you're working alongside teachers and also when you're teaching your pre-service teachers, what is your expectation that it looks like in action? You've given us a few clues here. You've
Just
talked about
wondering if
multiple
that's my
opportunities to
internet not
respond. You've
helping.
talked about breaking down into obtainable chunks, but what does it look like when you're observing this practice in action?
Okay, just go back a bit because I think I lost you momentarily there,
Oh,
just with
sure.
the yeah, just give me the question again. Sorry. You went
That's
quiet for a
okay.
minute.
That's okay. So you kind of touched on this. You talked about breaking down into obtainable chunks. You talked about multiple opportunities to respond and aiming for that 8 to 14. What is it that the instruction really looks like if we're talking to our pre-service teachers, when we're working with them, if we're coaching and supporting teachers in the classroom? Can you give us some insight into what explicit instruction looks like when we're looking at it in classroom practice?
Okay, so if I was to summarize what explicit instruction is, it's me as a teacher looking at the students and saying, number one, are you paying attention? Do I have your attention? Attention is a major gatekeeper to learning. No attention, no learning.
Mm,
The next
mm,
thing is, are you thinking? Are you thinking while I'm teaching? And are you practicing? Because if we fulfill those three criteria, there's a greater chance that the students are engaged and they're actually learning. So when I go into a classroom, if I see the students facing the teacher, that's very
mm,
important. Some people die on the hill for desks, and you'll find the kids are all facing different directions. This is a real issue. Something else that's really important is if the children are sitting on the mat, that you don't have a big box of dinosaurs or books right at the bottom of
mm,
or underneath the whiteboard, because the students will be wanting to scamper towards them and play with them. So we try and minimise all the distractions. We make sure that if the students are using whiteboards, that they're out of their hands until they need them, or they're going back to their
mm,
desks to do some writing, then coming back down to the floor. So, on one level, as a teacher, you are managing that learning environment. That's one of our jobs. Our jobs is to cause learning. How do we cause
mhm,
learning? Manage the learning environment. The next thing we have to do as a teacher is we have to manage the initial first teaching of anything we do. So we need to break things down, make it easy and explicit for students, and gradually build that knowledge. So, as a beginning teacher, you would really want to have a good scope and sequence, a great program. And that would mean that you would be teaching, say, CH as in chip, for chip, before you got to CH as in sh for champagne,
mm,
and before you got to CH as in so for chemical. So a good scope and sequence will give you a guide of how to take this really big body of knowledge and break it down in a manageable way so students will learn. Now, the final thing that you have to do, Carla, is you have to manage the opportunities to review and to retrieve. We
mm,
are teaching children, when we come to reading, a bunch of letters that historically had a reason why they're called and name the sounds that they are, but that is knowledge. And knowledge requires lots and lots of opportunities for practice. So initially, I'm going to
mm,
introduce a sound, and then they're going to forget the next day. And that's okay, we're going to go again and again. But I need to get that human brain to the point where it just knows it when it sees it. That's automaticity.
mm,
And we know that if students
mm,
are automatic with single sounds, the strategy of decoding words, being able to identify words, having that sight word recognition that the bottom of the reading rope really demands that we
mm,
establish for children. The words are literally jumping off the page, then we know that they're ready to go to the next stage of reading. It is incredibly unhelpful to have a child decoding a word and halfway through go, oh, is that a b or a p? We don't want that. So
mm,
explicit instruction is an opportunity to review and rehearse and then get the kids to the point where they can just automatically retrieve that information and get on with the business of comprehension.
mm. So if teachers are starting out, as many will be, when I think about, our sort of nationwide movement to
Mm,
implementing a structured literacy approach here in New Zealand, a lot of teachers might be in the early stages of really honing their craft when it comes to
mm,
explicit instruction. what would be a few, I'm going to call them quick wins or quick areas of focus that teachers could sort of isolate or compartmentalize and think about? I'm just going to focus on my routines, or I'm going to think about what Lorraine was saying
Mm.
about attention, because you've actually given us lots of really tangible things to think about. But for those that are just starting out, how could we explicitly guide them with try this first, now go to focusing on this, and then focus on this in your instruction?
I think if we go to the work of Dr. Barak Rosenshine, who was an academic in the 1960s, who went around and observed teachers to figure out how come some got better results than others, who were the most impactful
Mm,
teachers, and how did they do it. He came up with eventually 10, having whittled it down from many, many items to 10 principles of effective instruction. The first is begin each lesson with a brief review of previously learned material. Now, if we take it back to reading, there's the importance of what we call a daily review. A daily review is probably not entirely what Rosenshine had in mind if he saw it happen certainly in Australia, but it's a fast-paced review of previously learned material. So any teacher can do a quick review, and you can start with 2 minutes. Gradually, it would be great to
mm,
grow that, because within the structure of a daily review, you are briefly reteaching. You don't want to make the mistake of pointing at a letter or a word and saying, who knows what that word is, or who can tell me what the vowels are. That's not how we teach explicitly. We remind the students quickly, they tell us the answer, we move on. So I guess the teach first is really important too. And I know that certainly when I went to uni, the whole idea was elicit from the students, get
mm,
them to tell you what they know. Well, we're teaching something here that's unnatural. It's an invention. And the English language is one of the hardest languages to manage when you're learning how to read. So it's very important that we teach that explicitly. So the daily review for me is a great place to start. Now, the great thing is these days there are examples available online, and certainly
mm,
one of the I try to do, and I know you do as well, is to provide examples, because we want to take
mm,
away some barriers. And there are big barriers when it comes to explicit instruction. If you are a beginning teacher, it's your teacher knowledge. You don't necessarily always
mm,
have the necessary amount to do a really good job without a program. And I know that our teachers work very hard, but really knowing how to keep that herd moving of children, and doing the kind of things that will make a big difference requires some sort of scope and sequence, some sort of program. You need a game plan. The next thing that you really
mm,
need to do is to hone in on what the students need. Okay, so if you're thinking about your students now, you've got to think, okay, if there is an art to this science of reading, it's knowing who's in front of me and what do they need and how can I move them. Then, of course, that's really the design of the instruction. Explicit instruction is about design and delivery. So if you do feel like you're juggling, and I often feel like I'm juggling because I have to go and demonstrate this in classrooms as well, I'm also managing the participation and the engagement. And that's
mm,
the other thing that we do, explicit instruction. So for people starting out, just focus on the content. Try and get the content right. Look widely. There are marvelous materials available that will support you. A good program in the hands of a novice teacher is really helpful. It's too much to ask
mm,
people to know necessarily. And if I stopped working at a university and worked in a school, I would use a program, because I
mm,
know that it would keep students on track and it would be a more efficient way of doing things. So
mm,
yeah, design and delivery is really what we're about with explicit instruction,
mm,
and they are two distinct components. So I say to teach explicitly, you need to have the will and the skill. And the skill
mm,
is something we really need to work on. If you are a leader, you're thinking about building teacher knowledge, equipping teachers with the opportunities to practice the instructional skills required in explicit instruction. It's also about motivation. It's also about embedding. And the embedding is
mm,
the critical part. And I'm excited because I think I get to come and talk to you and your wonderful team in Auckland soon, for your literacy symposium in August. And I'm really
mm,
hoping to pick on some of those embedding practices because it takes some time. It's not an overnight thing. I
Mm,
sometimes go and watch teachers and they'll have all the books. They'll have Ibarra and Hollingsworth, Explicit Direct Instruction. They'll have Anita Archer's book and they'll say, I've read these books. And then I'll watch them teach and I'll say, gosh, I wonder which bit of the book they read because even though they know the theory, yeah, even though they know the
mm,
theory, the actual practice is something that takes time. And it's not just
mm.
whiteboards, it's not just about pop sticks. These are very useful tools. It's about what you're teaching and how that's actually the most important thing.
Mm. You said about to teach explicitly, we need to have the will and the skill. I love that. That is such a great quote. And as you were just talking now, my head goes to content design and delivery, and where you're saying about, it's important for teachers ultimately to have the content. That's a way for us to alleviate
Mm,
their cognitive load and allow them to focus on the delivery because, as you
mm.
say, just because we've read some theory doesn't mean we necessarily have the skill to be able to put that delivery, or the principles of the delivery in action.
Yeah.
Let's now go to what are the challenges you've seen as teachers that you've worked alongside have began their journey into explicit instruction, and even those of us who have been on this journey for some time, we can always improve or hone our practice, right? So, what are some of the challenges or considerations that we might take into account when we're working alongside in a literacy coach role or just working to improve our own practice?
I think the important message is let's not kill ourselves. Of course, that can sometimes be the way things will go in schools. I worry with leaders sometimes. They will go visit a school, they'll see everything working brilliantly, and they'll say, right, I want that tomorrow. And that's not possible. I think about schools that I've worked with.
Mm,
In order to get explicit instruction going, it's very important to start at the beginning. And I always start with reading. If reading's not, if we don't work on reading, then we're going to go on having difficulties potentially in a school. So it's important to pick things off in a particular order. And my order may not be your order, but I would start off with a core phonic program, systematic phonic program, which would enable students to learn how to read. So I'd worry initially about beginning reading. Um, I would also suggest, and I
mm.
particularly like the scripted program Spelling Mastery. It's not for everybody, but certainly the results are fantastic. So I find that that's a very useful thing to suggest teachers do next because it means that everybody in the school is doing something associated with literacy that is new and potentially a little challenging as well. And if you have a scripted program or a semi scripted program or just a really good program, it means you've taken away the challenge of actually what to teach. So the focus becomes how, and it's much easier when it is semi scripted or scripted to then go into explicit instruction, which of course is unscripted. You're really on your own with unscripted instruction. And so even though I wish videos of teachers who can do it and I can do it, it's taken me a long time to get those scripts going in my head. So I think that can be a real barrier. Looking at someone doing it and thinking, oh, yeah, I can do that really easily without perhaps having that supportive program. Or certainly these days, when I give teachers slides, I actually script them and I say, take that away when you know what to say. Because when you're stood up in front of students, it's quite hard. People don't always know what to say.
When you were explaining to us about the difference between scripted and non-scripted, that's a really quite sort of relative piece for us here at the moment because we get asked a lot of questions about the scripting. And as you know, most recently we've been working with a whole lot of ITE providers across the country, and some of them shared with us that one of the things that they sometimes observe when they're visiting teachers in schools is how reliant teachers are on the script. And I was listening to you and thinking that I wonder if one of the things that we haven't been clear enough around, and or teachers and leaders and literacy coaches don't quite understand, is that in fact the script acts as a bit of a crutch while teachers are learning or honing their craft in this instructional method. And then, as you said, they can take the script away once they've got it down pat and use the teaching materials, because they have become somewhat automatic in the process of the lesson structure, and they know that. And I know myself, when I'm in and out of classrooms working with teachers and modelling lessons, it feels like riding a bike when you get back into those teaching slides, because you know the process so well, but you also know when you've gone a little bit off track and you need to bring yourself back, because that process is so embedded. Do you find that do you find that teachers have a misunderstanding of the purpose of a script, and or is there a way that you support them to understand the initial purpose of having a script and then taking that away when the time is right?
Absolutely. I think the premise that I come from is that we need instruction to be clear, concise, and understood by all. And sometimes as teachers, I will go in and I'll observe a teacher and they'll be very wordy. There'll be lots and lots of words, and that's okay, but it's imprecise. So if I'm teaching something explicitly to students, I want to use the least amount of language, and I want it to be 100% clear to everybody what is required of them. So I will use a script in that regard, because someone smarter than me wrote those scripts. And I think it's really important to make sure my language is clear and consistent. I work with some scripted programs, and I will just automatically go into that routine now if I'm working with a group of students. So, for example, I would say, Carla, the word is stay. What word? Stay. Listen. A. Tell me the sounds in stay. A. That's a script. I'm not following it though anymore, because I just know it off by heart.
Yeah.
That is a more efficient way than me going in and saying, oh, everybody, okay. So what I want you to do is, in a moment, I'm going to get you to tell me the sounds in a word, and I'm going to say that word. There's a more efficient way of doing it. So scripting is really important because it's about clear communication. Also, if I'm going to be teaching students to hear sounds in words, if I have some instructional language around that is consistent, whenever I go into that routine, the students are not having to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. So it reduces cognitive load for students. It also means if you are, for example, taking into vocabulary, doing a great vocab routine, and I've seen many teachers do it, and they start off by cueing the kids and saying, so I'm going to say this, then you say that. By a couple of weeks into it, the students just know what to do. So those scripts are very powerful, because you can write them, and I have to write them myself sometimes before I go in and teach. It just means I'm going to be clear and consistent with my instruction. I am going to be teaching first. So it's a great prompt. I also know that if I'm using a scripted program, I don't have night after night to stay up and write what I'm going to be doing with the students, and a scripted program will do that for me. I think it taps into the notion that we are somehow taking away teachers' creativity, we're undermining their knowledge. To that, I would say there are so many other things to teach. If I can take away the burden of teaching spelling, so I'm still working with teachers who think that look, cover, write, check is the most effective way to teach spelling. We know that it's not. And it's no fault of those teachers. It's just that's what they've done for a very long time. So when we say to everybody, right now at the school, we're going to be teaching spelling explicitly. So you need to start teaching spelling rules. If you look at a spelling rule, they are so complicated. There's so much in them. We don't want to just give the students a worksheet and say, okay, fill it in. We actually want to be able to teach that spelling rule. So that's when teachers will often go, oh, I really like, say, spelling mastery, because it shows me exactly how to teach the rule. And then if I'm not delivering spelling mastery and I'm asked a question, I'll go straight into that instructional routine. So I think that people have an issue around scripting because they think it's taking away autonomy of teachers. I, in fact, think it's very empowering, and you're so right. Having delivered different scripts for a while, they're just now part of my instructional
Mm,
routine. And I know that my
mm,
language is clear and consistent, and that's a big issue. It's like if you think about,
mm.
magic E, fairy E, bossy E, ninja E, just pick one. Okay, pick one. In one school, you can have bossy, fairy, and there are little kids thinking, "Oh my goodness, this E, That's why a script can be useful. Let's standardize our language a little bit so we're not confusing
Mm,
children."
mm. I love that. And when you were talking, I was thinking about one of the other key things that really just sort of stood out for me was that actually, we talk about, or we didn't say these words, but you were talking about active participation as part of explicit instruction, right?
Mm.
And so, when you were talking about the script, I wonder if people really truly understand that those scripts are written in a way to cause active participation through writing and opportunities to respond. And actually, the active participation is thread through the scripts in many cases. So students are reading something, they're writing something, they're saying something to a partner, they're engaging and actually participating in the learning throughout the way. So that's another thing that I was really thinking about as you were talking to. And then
And
you talked about the
Carla,
instructional.
sorry, I
You
interrupted you
go.
then. I was just going to
That's
say that
okay.
if you think about what a good instructional routine looks like and you really break it down, and we look at the teach first, I'll show you how, my turn. I'll show you how. I
Mm,
model it first. Then I do lead. And the lead is everybody together, including me, do it together. Do it together, do it together, do it together. That's actually where the learning takes place. Sometimes as
mm,
teachers, we model it, then we test, and there's no opportunities for practice. And it's that bit in the middle, the practice, that's the big bit. That has to be the big bit of
mm,
your teaching that possibly wasn't there when I went to school. It was like model one example, off you go. There's 10 problems to solve, and if you got it wrong, you got it wrong. Because we're now doing more in that we do phase, and I'm
mm,
quite particular. I'll meet with students who are repeating every item maybe 3 times. And the reason for that is you might be looking out the window the first time, you may not be paying attention the second time, but if I only presented it once to you and you weren't paying attention, then you didn't get it
mm,
at all.
mm,
Opportunity for practice and reinforcement is absolutely built into that model of I do, we do, you do. And that can be something that you script as a teacher, or it's something that commercially you can access. But it means that you're teaching first and you are providing those opportunities to respond. And it also helps. One thing about explicit instruction is we have something called unison oral responding. Now, the unison oral responding is so important because it means if everybody's responding, there's safety in numbers, we're all having a go together, everybody's responding, so there's less likelihood that the kids aren't paying attention. So we have their attention.
mm,
Now, of course, we don't do this all day, but if we do get those intense little pockets of instruction in, certainly in the work that I've done, and I get to work in remote communities in Australia, they make a massive difference. And again, what is it? It's that opportunity for practice.
mm, mm. And I bet you find through that, can you tell me the term again? Unison.
Unison oral responding. So people sometimes call it a choral response. So I'll say to the
Yeah.
students word and they'll all say stay. Or I might say
Mm,
something like, when I say convoluted, you say twisted or coiled. Convoluted, twisted or coiled. And then I'll say
yeah.
twisted or coiled, and they'll all say back to me convoluted. So there's a choral reversal and a choral response. It means everybody
Mm,
responding together.
mm. And I think, two things crop up for me when you talk about that. One is that you believe that everybody has the right to and the capability to participate in the learning. And the second thing is that if I am a student who is a little bit more reluctant, you like you said, you've provided such a safe environment for me to, even if it's a little bit delayed or when I'm ready because I can trust the process, I will be more likely to participate and lean into the opportunity to take part in that lesson.
So, Carla, if we think about our students that we're most concerned about, you know what? Those opportunities for practice are critical. We know that some children will get it really easily, some will take more opportunities to practice than others. We need to provide that opportunity. I'm also going to presume competence. Now, I have, as I'm sure you do sometimes, have the opportunity to go into a classroom and I don't know the students. So I have very high expectations for all of them. And one of the favourite things teachers will sometimes say to me is, oh my goodness, I was really surprised. Carla doesn't usually respond that way. Well, my expectation is Carla will respond. And so often teaching in this way, presuming competence, I need everybody to do it. I remember going into a classroom some time ago and there was one little chap who just wouldn't say anything. And I was like, come on. And eventually his little mouth started to move. And I thought, oh, this is great. And then the teacher's looking at me and I thought, what's going on here? And then she said, he's elective mute. He doesn't speak in class. And I thought, well,
yeah.
but I almost had him with the mouth movements because
Mm,
my expectation was, come on, if you're not doing it, you're going to fall behind. Everybody needs to do this. I think it's also really important to point out that if someone doesn't get something right when you're teaching explicitly, it's very neutral. I would simply say, listen, Carla, the word is stay. What word? Stay. And you'd say it with me. I would tell you the answer. And then I'd say, listen, stay. Try again. And then you would give me the response. Very neutral. And, you know, if I look at a really good teacher in action, they hear the error straight away and they go back and they teach. So I think that when you have the language of instruction under control, whether it's scripted or you've come up with it yourself, it gives you the opportunity to hear the errors, correct the errors as you're moving along. If you aren't too sure what the intention of the lesson is and it's quite broad what you're doing, you may not necessarily be hitting the mark as well.
The language of instruction piece for me in my own practice, Lorraine, has been so huge in helping me. You know, I don't so much work with intervention students now, but when I did work in intervention and when I'm working alongside teachers in a classroom setting, it's that instructional routine, which has a really strong undercurrent of the language of instruction that's helping me to be able to see them, how to bridge the gap between episodes of instruction. So an example is we might be going into a piece of writing and a teacher observes that a student has an incorrect phoneme to grapheme correspondence, or there's a grammatical error in a sentence. Because that teacher has become so strong in an instructional routine and they have such good quality language of instruction, they're immediately able to spot the situation, and then they can fall back into that micro piece of routine and instruction that then helps the student on the spot to correct or to have a quick moment of reteaching. And I think that's been one of the greatest gifts that learning about structured literacy but explicit instruction has really given me myself as a teacher. And I'm not sure that all teachers understand that this instruction is something that we can take from moment to moment across the curriculum in our classrooms when we are responding to how students, I want to say the output from the student in different circumstances across the curriculum.
I think you're right. And I think also one of the things teaching explicitly shows you is that you just have the one intention. There's just one thing you want them to be able to do by the end of the sequence, whatever it is you're teaching. So you become very focused on what that is. You also become very conscious of not asking students to do something that they don't have the precursor skills for. So because it's led and we are the experts in this area, students can be experts as well in things that we never want to be experts in, but they're the novices. So what we have to do is take this body and break it down of knowledge for them. One of the other things you'll see, particularly with someone who teaches explicitly and does it well, is they might have a slide up on the screen And for example, on that slide, they might be doing a routine, say, around spelling words. So there might be some pictures down the bottom of the screen. And I think of a slide that I use where I'll have words like bee, queen, squeeze, knee. There's a variety of E. So I start off by reminding the students that these two letters go together and they say E. What do they say? E. And then I go through all the sounds that they are going to need to spell those words, and they are on the screen. Now,
Mm.
there's a bunch of students who already figured out what is going on, and they are on their whiteboards and they've written the word bee, queen, sleep, whatever the words are. But there's also another group of students who are going, oh, how do you do a burp? So they look
Mm.
up and they are able to get that information. So I think what it makes you very aware of is, what are the precursor skills? What assumptions am I making about the students? Do they actually have that knowledge? Now, if you think about that in a classroom, what that means is that everybody teaches to a huge range in a classroom. I can have one slide up on the screen. There'll be some children who, at the end of that little routine, will have written 3 words on their board correctly, spelt correctly,
Mm.
that all have the E's in them. The others will have written all the words, and then I would have said, right, I would like you to write a sentence with 2 of those words. Off you go. So I can have all the students doing something at their level that uses the precursor knowledge that I've just reviewed. And that's something that people don't often assume about explicit instruction.
Mm.
They go, well, you can't
Mm.
differentiate and differentiate,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I see videos of teachers who will split their slide 3 ways, and there'll be lots of little activities the students are doing, and everyone's doing something related to what was just retaught, but at their level. And that's a good way
Mm.
of managing that range in the classroom. Because the alternative, and if people say to me, I don't like explicit instruction, I go, it's not about what you like, it's about what works. But what did you think was a better alternative? Did
Mm.
you have a better idea? I was talking to a teacher yesterday and they said, but what about reading groups? Well, reading groups are okay, but if you've got 5 of them in the room, what are the other 4 groups doing when you're working with one group? And they get you once a week, and there's going to be a weaker group in there, and they are going to be fixing up their own reading issues, which they're not, of course, if they're in a reading group. So you become more conscious, and I guess we're back to where we started, about the efficiency. What is the
Yeah.
most efficient of getting through these things? To
Mm.
which I said to the teacher, well, she said, I like the routine of it. I said, well, can we take out the reading group or guided reading? Can we swap it out with a fluency routine? There's a routine, it's 6 minutes. And in that time, the students will all be doing something slightly differently, but they'll all be doing something that's going to really support them with reading. So sometimes we can swap out these things if people feel that there needs to be something particularly there in the classroom, and align it a little bit more with something that's going to be more effective.
Mm. That's brilliant. And you mentioned earlier about, one of the most important things, or something for teachers to really be thinking about, is who is sitting in front of them and what the needs of those students are. So I just wanted to kind of loop that back in there, because that is always, isn't it? It's always at the forefront of what we're teaching and how we teach it and how we scaffold and differentiate the teaching and learning.
I think also, and I'm really conscious that when people have talked about science of reading, for example, some people have said, "Oh, yeah, this too will pass." Well, it's a body of research, so it can't pass. It's not like a fidget spinner or a yo-yo. It's not something that's going to go out of fashion. It's just what the research says. But the problem is, we then have lots of commercial programs that are all badged now science of reading, and they're all
Mm.
badged explicit. And if you were a teacher who wasn't really sure, which one would you choose? And we need to sort of move beyond that really strict, rigid program and say, let's look at the kids in front of us.
Mm.
Sometimes we start off with a program, and then because we're not too sure what we're doing, and then we're like, oh, okay, I can see that here's Carla. She can already read, and she's sitting in my year 1 class, and I have a child here who can't read. How do I cater for everybody? And that really is the art of the science of reading. It's
Mm.
applying the knowledge that you have to know that Carla's going to need a lot more work on letter sound knowledge to decode words, And another child who's already reading really well is going to need more opportunities for fluency practice in order to get closer to comprehension. Now, if you know enough about reading and the science of reading research, you will have the skills to be able to plan for that within your
Mm,
classroom.
100%. And my own personal professional experience has been that the more I have learned about the research, the more that I've learned about that body of information that, is represented in the science of reading, the more I've been able to do exactly what you were just saying, Lorraine. And, that kind of cheesy saying of it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. We've got to trust that. We've got to trust and I think afford teachers the time to learn in these sort of obtainable chunks, just like we talk about for our students as well, that they
Mm,
have time. You said earlier about starting with their phonics or their spelling instruction and then moving and adding those elements on or those aspects on so that they feel confident themselves in developing their instructional routines and that language of
mm.
instruction that we've been talking about. Now, we are beyond excited to be hosting you again as one of our keynotes in August. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, what you're thinking you're going to bring us when you come back to New Zealand in August?
Yeah, well, I'm so excited, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to come back and share some more, really along the lines of explicit instruction. And knowing that the first time I came, some people would have seen some videos, and you never can tell. As a result of just showing a few videos, a lot of people contacted me and said, "Oh, wow, I've started." Well, you never know when that's going to happen, in a room full of teachers. So, what I'd
Mm,
like to do is now sort of build on that and start showing some people what it looks like when we're going to pure retrieval,
mm,
what it takes in a school to really embed the practice, that role of instructional coaching, what good instructional coaching looks like, particularly around the documentation. I am so privileged to work with some really expert principals in Australia who are really leading the way in terms of how you sustain and embed the practice. Because the worst thing that I ever hear is someone who says to me, "Oh, yeah, yeah, we've done the explicit thing. Now we've moved on to something else." That means you haven't done it. It's not embedded. It takes a long time to embed. And, even if you're the most enthusiastic teacher or principal, it will still take time. And
mm,
as you said, we'll start off with reading and spelling, but we're going to have to get to vocabulary and writing. And then at some point, we're going to have to look at what to do with morphology. There's a lot there to pick off. So we need a game plan to do that. So I'm hoping to share some of the approaches that teachers have taken, the schools that I've worked with, and certainly the importance of that embedding. Because the one off PD, as we both know, is not effective. It doesn't work. And it's the kind of thing where we all get told to go and do the PD at the beginning of the year. And then by the end of the year, no one's talking about it anymore because we're not doing it anymore. We've moved on to something else. We don't want that. We need to sustain the practice. And so I hope to be sharing how to actually do that.
amazing. Thank you so much for your time with us this afternoon, Lorraine, and probably what is still your morning. Am I right?
That's right.
So we look forward to seeing you in August and also sharing this chit chat for people to reconsider or just take a moment to reflect on what is their instruction looking like in the here and now. And I think this is something, I know that Dr. Anita Archer would say to us, and I always have her voice in my head saying, and she says, Carla, it's the delivery that really matters. And that's what you've really honed for us today is that it's really important that we reflect whatever our role is in the space of education or educational improvement is to be reflecting and leaning into the conversation of what does my practice look like and what could I do next to hone that just that little bit further. So thank you for the opportunity to cause some potential intellectual friction in our own thinking and review and reflect on what our instructional practice looks like.
My pleasure.